everyone. So for this week's Read Aloud, I picked a book with a lot of perseverance in it because that is our month's life skill. It's called Kate's Light, and it is about Kate Walker and the Robins Reef Lighthouse. And it's going to take us a lot of perseverance to get through it as well because it's a bit of a longer read, but it's really good. So here we go. In 1882, Kate Card sailed across the ocean from Germany to America with her small son Jacob. She was 34 years old, a widow, and hoped to find a better life for them. Even though she knew only a few words of English, she quickly found a job as a cook at the officers' quarters at Fort Hancock, New Jersey. John Walker, the keeper of the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, took his meals at the officers' quarters. Impressed with Kate's energy and determination, he began giving her English lessons. Soon, they were married. For a year, John, Kate, and Jacob lived on shore in a large house next to the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, where Kate kept a garden and a few chickens. Then John accepted a position as keeper at Robins Reef, an offshore lighthouse in New York Bay, between Manhattan and Staten Island. Kate was unhappy about the move. She knew she would miss her friends in town, her garden, and the chickens. And where would Jacob run and play? Had she really come all the way from Germany to live in a lonely lighthouse? From far off, Robins Reef Lighthouse looked like a tiny candle on a birthday cake. Up close, the 5-story cast iron tower loomed over their rowboat. The lighthouse stood on a granite foundation surrounded by water. Kate noticed there wasn't a blade of grass or a single flower. Except for John and Jacob, her only company would be seals and circling seagulls. Kate followed John and Jacob up the lighthouse's steep ladder. When she reached the top, John gave her a hand onto the wide deck that wrapped around the main floor of the lighthouse. Jacob impatiently pulled his mother toward the open door. Inside, a large circular room served as both kitchen and dining room. Lockers for clothes and cupboards for china were fitted neatly into the walls. An oilcloth was spread on the kitchen table. At the far end of the room was a large black stove for cooking that also heated the downstairs in the winter. John ushered Kate and Jacob up the winding stairs to the second-floor parlor. More steps took them to a large bedroom on the 3rd floor and 2 snug bedrooms on the 4th. In the small watchroom on the 5th floor, a door opened to a narrow catwalk with a sweeping view of Manhattan, New Jersey, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. A steep ladder led to the topmost floor, the glassed-in lantern room. The great light stood still and silent in the center of the tiny room. Its polished lenses sparkled in the sunlight, bright as a diamond. Those first few weeks, Kate didn't unpack her trunks, but she hung pictures and a pendulum clock in the parlor and filled the windowsills with flower pots and plants. She put down bright scatter rugs in all the rooms. In the kitchen, she settled her rocking chair next to the big black stove and moved her sewing machine under one of the windows where the light was good. Slowly, Robins Reef began to feel more like a home, her home, and Kate decided to unpack. Once or twice a week, if the weather was good, John or Kate rode to Staten Island for fresh food, supplies, newspapers, and the mail. Sometimes Kate visited with friends she'd made there before rowing back to the lighthouse. Jacob boarded with a family in town and went to school, but he spent his weekends and summers at Robins Reef. Kate applied to the United States Lighthouse Board for the job of assistant keeper. John had taught her a lot about keeping a lighthouse when they lived at Sandy Hook. Soon a letter arrived with good news. Kate had got the job. The work at Robins Reef filled their days and nights. In the keeper's daily log, a new day started at 12 noon, not midnight. Jack and Kate had to record exactly how much coal and kerosene they used each day. They noted the wind and the weather. If a ship foundered on the reef or a fisherman needed to be rescued, that was in the logbook too. They polished the brasswork on the light every day and cleaned the lenses once a month, a 2-day job. Each morning they filled 5-gallon cans with kerosene so that it was ready for the all-night watch. I'm cleaning the lenses. At sunset, regular as clockwork, gunfire and a bugle call from Fort J on nearby Governor's Island signaled it was time to light the lamp. All through the night, John and Kate took turns keeping watch, refilling the lamp when the kerosene was low, trimming the wicks so they wouldn't smoke, and rewinding the pulley mechanism that kept the light flashing. On foggy nights when the lighthouse beacon could not be seen, no one got any sleep. They had to fire up the steam engine in the basement that set siren blasts every 3 seconds to warn passing ships about the dangerous shoals next to the lighthouse. If the steam engine broke down, one of them hammered on a bell on the catwalk outside the watchroom until the fog lifted. Their first spring at Robin's Reef, Kate and John's daughter May was born. In October, the Statue of Liberty opened. They watched the celebration through binoculars from the catwalk. There were bands, speeches, and fireworks. Several happy years passed. In the evenings after supper, Kate's sewing machine hummed. Little May played with her toys and dolls. John might page through a week's packet of newspapers before beginning the night watch. Or one of them would choose a book to read from the traveling library that circulated from lighthouse to lighthouse. Sometimes late in the evening, Robin's Reef felt like a ship, peacefully at anchor. Life in a lighthouse had its rhythms, Kate thought, as the soft sound of lapping water lulled her gently to sleep. Then one bitter February, when May was 3, John came down with pneumonia. Day and night, Kate nursed him, all the while tending the light and looking after May. John needed to see a doctor, but the harbor was choked with ice, and a trip to Staten Island would be dangerous. When he did not get better, Kate raised the distress signal, the American flag flown upside down, and prayed that hope would come. Soon men from the Lighthouse Depot on Staten Island came to take John to the hospital. Bundled in blankets, John looked up at Kate as he was helped into their small boat and said, "Mind the light, Kate." Kate squeezed his hand. Of course, she must stay behind and mind the light. The passing ships depended on it, and lives would be lost if the light went dark. Days went by without any word. Finally, Kate spied a small boat rowing slowly out to the lighthouse. The oarsman was alone. Kate knew the news was bad. John had died. A letter came from the lighthouse board informing Kate she must leave Robin's Reef in 10 days. But Kate persuaded the board to let her stay on until a replacement could be found. For 4 years, Kate worked as temporary keeper at low pay, while the lighthouse board searched for a man to do the job. 2 men turned down the post because they said it would be too lonely. Finally, in 1895, Kate was hired as permanent keeper and got a raise, making her one of the first women on the eastern seaboard to be put in charge of an offshore lighthouse. A year later, Jacob, now 20, was hired as her assistant. Jacob lived part of the time on Staten Island, where he was courting his sweetheart, Loretta, and where May was going to school. But several times a week, he rode to the lighthouse with supplies and took the night watch. There were no days off for Kate, not even on holidays. One Christmas, Kate encouraged Jacob and May to spend the day on Staten Island with friends. All day she kept an eye on the weather. A light snow began to fall. Then it grew heavier and changed to sleet. Kate knew her children would not try to row back to the lighthouse that night. As darkness fell, Kate started the siren. The wind picked up, and Kate heard a frightening sound out on the deck. One of the chains holding the lighthouse dory had come loose. She would have to go out and reattach the rowboat, or lose her only lifeline to the outside world. Kate opened the door and stepped onto the icy deck. The wind nearly whirled her off the landing. As she neared the dory, the loose chain hit her in the eye. Finally, her frozen fingers secured the boat. Then Kate crawled back to the lighthouse door. Once inside, she sat down to a simple supper and counted her blessings. Although life at Robin's Reef could be lonely and hard in the winter, when summer came, Kate's friends from Staten Island would row out to the lighthouse for picnics. During one visit, Kate and her friends were sitting outside on the open deck, drinking tea and enjoying the afternoon. Watching the constantly changing waterfront was better than any parade. One of her friends asked her if she was ever lonely. "Lonely?" said Kate. "Of course. But there are worse things than loneliness. Loneliness has taught me I can be a fairly entertaining companion for myself. And there are advantages. No burglars, no prying neighbors, no gossip, and plenty of fresh air. Kate became known for her rescues. One took place on a stormy winter day. Kate and Jacob watched through binoculars as a schooner foundered on the reef, then rolled over on its side. Jacob wanted to go, but Kate insisted that she would. She threw on her oilskin and hat and lowered the lighthouse dory onto the churning black water. The wind cut into her like a knife as she rowed toward the struggling crew. When she reached the men, she helped them one by one onto the boat. After the 5 were safely aboard, the captain looked around for his dog, Scotty. That's when Kate saw a small, exhausted terrier paddling in the waves. Kate maneuvered the boat close to Scotty and fished him out of the water with an oar. The poor dog lay at her feet, cold and limp. For 2 hours, Kate and the men took turns rowing against the wind and strong currents. When they got back to the lighthouse, Kate wrapped Scotty in a blanket and put him on the rug next to the stove. In bad weather, Kate always kept a pot of hot coffee on the stove. She poured a cup of coffee down Scotty's throat. The dog's eyes opened in surprise, then he gasped and shivered. After the storm died down, Jacob rowed the rescued men to the mainland. The captain promised to be back in a few days for Scotty. By the time he returned, Kate and Scotty had become good friends. As the captain and Scotty were leaving, the dog gave Kate a look of gratitude she would never forget. One day, a letter came from the Lighthouse board saying it was time for Kate to retire. The new retirement age was 70, and Kate was 71. She had lived at Robin's Reef for 33 years and rescued more than 50 people. Kate moved to a cottage on Staten Island with May, where she could be near her family and friends. Reporters from as far away as California and Canada came to write stories about Kate. Her eyes lit up or filled with tears as she recalled happy times and sad. Every morning when the sun came up, she remembered, I stood at the window and looked toward John's grave. Sometimes the hills were brown, sometimes green, and sometimes white with snow. But they always brought the same message, something I heard him say more often than anything else. Just 3 words. Mind the light. So that is the true story of Kate Walker. And next week, I'm going to be reading one of these lovely books over here. So I'll see you then.